Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today we're taking a look at a LionSteel folder. This is the LionSteel Myto, designed by Moletta. I'm pretty sure the name was derived from when the designer dropped the prototype on his foot, but nonetheless, it is very cool. And look, LionSteel does make some really cool stuff. The Thrill that I reviewed a while ago, the M4, which is one of my favorite fixed blades of all time, the B35, the B41, both fantastic fixed blades. The LionSteel Kerr, which is a great EDC knife, very similar, I think, in design and size to this. It's going to be a little more hand filling. So anyway, that's a whole, I don't want to get into too much stuff just about LionSteel itself, but this is their most recent folder, and it is really, really interesting. There's a lot of stuff to talk about here, by the way, guys. So this will probably be a little longer than some of my other videos. And specifically, I want to address a couple things here. One being the blade grind. There's a really legitimate question that I think we need to ask about what kind of blade grind we want for EDC type purposes. And that's, other people are going to have different answers to that question, but this is definitely a knife that gets us to ask that for sure, because it's a pretty thick grind, and LionSteel's known to have pretty thick blade grinds. So let's go ahead and quickly go over size and weight. Most of you will be familiar with this. You can always look on Blade HQ or whatever, but this is 7 13/16, 3 1/4, a little over 3 1/4 inch blade, 4.5 inches when closed. Okay, so it's not a huge folder at all and doesn't take up a lot of room in the pocket. The weight on this is 3.4 ounces, which is very comfortable to carry. And finally, the grip area. If you have huge hands, this could be an issue. The grip area is only 3.4 ounces. I mean, 3 3/8 inches. Wow, I don't know how that happened. But there you go. Those are the specs. I will leave you to your own devices on that. I will do some comparisons later on, mostly comparing this to some alternatives that you might want to think about, or some, I would put this in a class of very good, very functional, practical EDC knives. And so I'm going to bring in some of my other favorite EDC knives as well that we may want to think about in terms of comparison or even competitive options. So first thing we want to get into is this blade discussion. I've got to say, I love the design of this blade, just this beautiful clean drop point, crown spine, M390 steel, satin finish, very high flat grind, which is at least, that's a good thing for sure. And it does, solve some of the challenge that this knife creates. Lots of material carried out here toward the tip. So pretty confidence inspiring blade without a doubt. There's a little bit of a micro recurve here as it comes into the plunge grind, so that's just a little tiny hiccup. I'm being really, really nitpicky. Some of you may not even be able to notice that on camera. In person you can notice it a bit, but I mean just barely. So that's a quick description of the blade. Let me say, in a general sense, I would describe this blade as being ground more for toughness. Okay, this is a knife, or this is a blade that's really meant to be quite robust. Okay, so this brings up the question is, do I want this kind of a blade for my EDC purposes? And first of all, let me do a quick cut test here just to demonstrate that while this is maybe a little on the thick side, let me just rip off a piece of cardboard here. So while this is on sort of the thickish side, it cuts really well and it moves through material just fine. It's not like I'm stuck and just can't get this to cut anything. But to give you an alternative example, if I take, all right, my 8010 here with a hollow grind. I know not all of them have a hollow grind. I would suggest the current 8010 probably cuts more like this, although the grind is still going to be a little bit higher. Let me just pull that off so I can do this. So as I cut, definitely at the beginning, and even as I just move through, you can notice a difference. This does move through the material a little bit easier. To give you something you might be familiar with, this felt a little more like a hinderer. So when I was cutting with this and this side by side, they felt pretty similar. And I think that makes sense, because hinderers are another knife that's kind of known to have that thicker blade grind and be designed to be tough and robust. You could put, some zero tolerance knives on this list as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Now for me, all right, I tend to like a little thicker blade stock. I like the confidence that it brings. I like and I don't do a lot of food prep with my knives. Now, I will say cutting up apples for the kids or something, you're going to notice with a knife like this, you're probably going to split that kind of, if you cut a potato or an apple or a carrot, any of those hard, crisp vegetables or fruits, it's probably going to split rather than slice. Okay. And so I definitely see the value of something like this. All right, this has this crazy thin, super aggressive hollow grind, and it slices like a dream. But that also means it's a very thin blade and there's not a lot of material here, and so this is not the most confidence inspiring knife that I own. Okay, so that there's this balance to be struck, and generally for EDC purposes, I want the balance to lean toward a thicker blade because I don't do a lot of food prep with my EDC. I don't do a lot of slicey tasks. So, for carving wood, for cutting up a bit of cardboard from time to time, um, opening packages, opening clamshell packages, cutting plastic. Most of those things, I'm fine with a thicker blade. Now, obviously, if you're cutting, I don't know, garden hose, that's where you're going to notice a big difference. But I can't say that I've ever had to cut a garden hose with my folder, although this will do the job. It's just you're going to have to put a little bit of extra force behind it compared to, a really thin slicey blade like what I was showing you on the Dogma. Okay, so let's carry on. We've had that blade discussion. Let me know what your thought is down below. For me, this is pretty good because while it's thick, it's not overly thick. Like I've had knives on the channel, and I've had knives where I've had to sharpen them and share them with you where the blade is so stupidly thick that I can't do anything. That is not the case we're dealing with here. It's just ground for sure on the thicker and more robust side of the equation. They've tried to emphasize toughness here, and that's I think totally fine given that this is sort of an EDC knife that may be asked to do who knows what. All right. I don't know if I mentioned the edge dimension. I'll just mention it one more time. This is 26 thousandths behind the edge, and that, a pair of two is 27 thousandths. It's just a thinner blade stock. So just to give you an idea of how thick this is, it's not ridiculous. All right. So what about the action? All right, let's talk about that. There are a couple things here that I want to bring up. First of all, of course, it's a titanium frame lock on bearings with a flipper tab. Now, the flipper tab is removable. I'm not going to remove it because I can really demonstrate if it didn't have the flipper tab, guess what? You just do this. So I don't need to take the flipper tab off to show the only other way you'd be able to open it. The value of this, or the purpose of this, I guess, is the idea that some places by law require you to have a folding knife that opens with two hands, and that's true in a lot of European countries. And since this is made in in Italy, which is a European country, and maybe they have that law in Italy, I'm not 100% sure, but that's the purpose of this removable flipper. So you could take it off and you'd have a knife that's legal in other places. By the way, if you're importing one of these to Canada, a good option would be to have the seller take that thing off, because now you're not going to be able to, like, you're going to have to open it two-handed, and that's great. That means no matter how strict or crazy the customs individual you get expecting your knife, they're not going to open it. They're going to have to use two hands, and it's very, very likely that it's going to pass. Now, by the way, should they just say, nope, it's a knife, I'm not letting it through, you have very little recourse. So just want to throw that out there. Okay, so we've got this removable tab. I don't want to belabor that point. There are a couple other parts, though, that are removable. We'll talk about that later. The other cool thing is that to remove that tab, they do include the tool, and they include replacement screws. So what happens is you take this screw out, this would come off, and there'd be a hole left. Well, they give you a little filler screw, a plug, if you will, that you can put into that hole so that it's not left with just a gaping hole in the bottom of the blade, or I guess the bottom of the front of the blade tank type of thing. So other than that, and that is an interesting feature that, to me in Canada, for my purposes, doesn't serve much, doesn't have much value, but okay, that's, for a lot of people, that's really important. And so, hey, that's great. Okay, in terms of the feel of this, it's pretty good. The way this flipper tab is, where it's located and the angle that it has, it's not perfect. All right, let's see. For light switch, you have a hard time catching it. If you do sort of a push button, well, you can't, but if you do sort of a push button light switch hybrid, that's where I find the best results. Straight light switch, it works well. Also, the detent is pretty nicely dialed in, and it is very smooth, okay? It does drop shut pretty nicely. And so this is about what we've come to expect from a high-end titanium frame lock in 2021. I mentioned for sure in my initial first look at this knife that the centering was quite bad. As you can see, I was able to play with this a little bit and get the centering on point, and that I didn't have to loosen the blade or anything so that it won't, like the lockup and side to side play is non-existent. It's still very, very solid, and it's centered. So that was I was quite happy to have that good experience. Now I want to transition into the handle, but we'll kind of do that naturally because I want to point out a couple of really cool little details here. So first of all, so here's the lock bar insert. They've put the screws in from this side, which is really, really nice. And it kind of cleans up the outside, keeps with that minimalist design. Here's the collar for the screw on this side to go in. There's another, let's see if I can show you. You can see the other one there at the tip of my finger. Okay, so a lot of little details that are really well done. This feature almost comes directly from the Kerr. There's a nice big cutout in the micarta here so that I can easily get a hold of that lock bar. That's very important as well. So in terms of lockup and deployment, it is very solid when it's locked up. The action is very, very smooth. It's not a Shirogorov, but it's as good as any, similarly priced high-end titanium frame lock. And the lock bar is very accessible, which is important to me. I hate when I have to fight to get my fingers on the lock bar and have a hard time deploying or unlocking the knife. Continuing, we're still kind of talking about action, but we're kind of transitioning over to the handle. Of course, we have this really, really attractive micarta on this one. There is a titanium version. As we flip this over, we've got a floating backspacer, which is a really, really nice touch. Now, I have essentially it just becomes a bolt now that holds the clip in place, but it is in this little bag. There is included in this little bag well, I don't have to get it out for you. Oh, there's the screw, but there you go. So a carbide, no focus. There we go. So a carbide tipped glass breaker. I'm not a big fan of glass breakers on knives. I have broken a lot of car windows, and I just don't think it's the best way to go about doing it. All right, hold on. My little sign is a little off center there. Let me fix it. So I've removed the glass breaker and I just have this on there. To me, that's completely fine. Now, while we're looking at this, let's take a look at this clip. And this is, this knife is full of little details like this. So here we have a clip that's milled titanium, of course. We've got a couple of holes in here. It's, they don't stop doing the artistry or the aesthetic, even when they come to something as simple as the clip. So you can see, it's tapered, it's chamfered, it's whole, it's drilled here, and then it's drilled again right there. So there are a lot of little details that are really interesting on this. The lock bar cutout is in sort of a parabola shape instead of just your standard square. Again, the details on this are what really make a difference. And then of course, we've got these contoured edges all with a little bit of patterning. There we go. You can see that patterning there now. So a lot of really, really nice attention to detail here. And that does translate into a knife that, one, feels like a lot of thought and a lot of time and energy was involved in putting this together. But number two, also feels really good in hand, right? They haven't just given us a couple of slabs of material and thrown it together. They've contoured everything. They made sure everything is flush and clean. And that does make an ergonomic difference. And not only, of course, on the handle, we didn't mention this, I guess maybe it's implied, but crowning the spine like this also makes a difference, so that when I'm cutting and I've got my finger up here on the back of the spine, which is kind of where it naturally lands in a saber grip, it still feels really, really nice. So in terms of handle design, construction, and feel, yeah, they've really done a great job. The micarta for me is fantastic. I guess I should point out in full titanium, I can't tell you how this feels. I will say, my buddy T Ready has done a 7 Ready has done a full review of the full titanium version of this knife. So if you want that some information on that, that's where I would direct you. You can go check that out. Finally, let me get to some comparisons or some competitive options that are going to be equally cool, equally high end, cost about the same amount, and offer sort of a similar thing. I guess before we get to those, very quickly, I'll just throw a pair of two in here, just because I know that's a knife most of you are familiar with. And so you can see that this is a little on the small side. I mentioned, so pair two is 8¼ inches and the Myto is 7¾ inches. There's a knife I have in my collection that's a fantastic knife that actually reminds me of this knife quite a bit. This is the Steel Will Apostate S35VN instead of M390. The Apostate I think is a little bit cheaper. We've got G10 instead of micarta, and the details maybe aren't quite as refined on this knife. However, the construction and the feel and just the overall functionality is quite similar. And there are a couple of things that I think the Apostate does really, really well. I love the external blade stops being big and robust. That's very, very welcome. I also appreciate, again, the very thick blade stock. So we've got a really, really tough, thick blade. And so if you're looking for a similar aesthetic, a similar approach, sort of an EDC plus type of mentality, the Apostate I think would be a really good potential alternative to the Myto. Thinking of potential alternatives, what else have I got? Oh yeah, the Monterey Bay Old Guard, similar size, similar clean lines, aesthetically, these kind of remind me of one another. Higher end titanium frame lock. Now this is on washers instead of bearings. Okay, but similar size, similar price point. I think these are around $200 and this is around $200. So this may be something that you would consider. We've talked about this before, and we'll talk about it again. Initially, when I got this, it's still really stiff detent, but it was even worse, and I have had to do some slight cleanup on the Myto there. On the Old Guard. Another knife that kind of puts me in mind of the Myto here is the ZT-460. I think that's right. Let's see. Yeah, 0640. Wow, what a fail. Sorry, guys. 0640, which is the Emerson ZT collab. Again, nice looking knife. This one is visiting from my friend Bradley. I can't believe I forgot the name of this knife. What a dummy. But again, similarly, high-end, well-built titanium frame lock. That's sort of in a nice EDC sort of category there. All right. Outside of that, I mean, there's some other ZTs that could fill a similar role that might be appealing to you, but not that I have right here available on the within reach. I will add one other. We've already had a pair of two in here, so let's throw in the Benchmade Super Freak, just because I think this is another high-end, really appealing, really broadly applicable and recommendable EDC style knife that's in a similar price point as well. All right, now let's go ahead and draw some conclusions. So having looked at all of those other knives, how does the LionSteel compare? First of all, I think there's some really classy and interesting details here that a lot of people are going to find very, very appealing. The only little hiccup that this knife had was the centering was off, but you can see I was able to fix that. I wasn't in love, and the only other thing would be for you to make a decision about what kind of thickness you want. This blade is a little thicker than I would like to see. I would like to see a thinner grind here, just because to me this doesn't strike me as this heavy duty, hard use type of tactical folder. It strikes me as a really classy, interesting EDC style knife. And for that approach, I'm generally going to want a slightly thinner blade. And I do think you could get away with a slightly thinner grind and still get the performance and toughness and durability that you're looking for. So what are my thoughts on the LionSteel Myto? I like this blade a lot. I think LionSteel has done a great job. And while I'm complaining about a couple little things here and there, overall, I think this is a fantastic knife. It's easy to recommend. Like if you like the look of this knife and it's really compelling to you as it is to me, then I think you will not be disappointed, especially, if you like stuff that's on the slightly smaller end of the spectrum. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.